it always begins with a beautiful lie. The promise that this time humanity has outsmarted its limits, that we finally found a way to create wealth without struggle, comfort without cost. Every empire tells itself this story. It starts as innovation, becomes pride, and ends as delusion. Once, people toiled under the sun to produce what they needed. Now, they sit behind desks and summon numbers on screens. Wealth from nothing, numbers from air. It feels like magic. It feels like control. But beneath the illusion, something begins to tremble. When money can be created endlessly, the line between value and fantasy blurs. The printing press, once a tool of invention, becomes a machine of illusion. And the people, grateful for their easy plenty, stop asking the old, dangerous questions. What is this worth? Who pays the price? How long can this last? The empire grows louder, richer, faster. The charts climb, the markets roar, and the people believe they are living in a golden age. But the truth hides in plain sight. Every note printed is a quiet promise to the future, a promise that cannot be kept forever. The powerful know this, but they've learned to dance with denial. It's easier to feed the illusion than to face the hunger beneath it. After all, as long as the lights stay bright and the shelves stay full, who would dare to look behind the curtain? And so the lie continues that wealth can be printed, that growth can be endless, that paper can replace meaning. But deep beneath the noise of prosperity, the foundations are whispering. Even the grandest illusions have a breaking point, and when it comes, it never asks permission. There was a time when money meant something real. A coin had weight, a note had backing, and every promise was tethered to gold, something you could hold in your hand. It kept the powerful honest, or at least cautious. You couldn't create more wealth than you possessed. You couldn't pretend forever. But then came a discovery too tempting to resist the idea that value could be created not from labor or land, but from belief alone. It began innocently, as it always does. A war to fund, a crisis to ease, a temporary shortcut. The rulers told themselves it was only for a moment, that once the storm passed, they would return to restraint. But power has its own gravity. Once you learn that paper can summon armies and silence fear, it becomes impossible to stop. The printing press became the new philosopher's stone, turning ink into power, promises into gold. But it was alchemy without wisdom. Each coin, each note, each digital entry created beyond what was earned pulled a thread from the fabric of time. The future was being mortgaged to pay for the present. The people celebrated. Markets soared, cities glowed, and everyone felt richer for a while. But behind the celebration was a quiet shift. Trust, once the foundation of money, began to dissolve. Wealth became less about value and more about illusion, about who could create it fastest and who could pretend longest. The rulers didn't notice, or maybe they did and simply didn't care. They had found the secret spell of civilization. Print, promise, repeat. And as long as the crowd believed, the magic would hold. But magic, like power, always demands a sacrifice. And the bill, though delayed, always comes due. For a time, it felt like paradise. The streets buzzed with new energy. Towers of glass reached for the clouds, and the air itself seemed to hum with promise. Everyone was getting richer, or at least it looked that way. Shops stayed open late, gold changed hands faster than ever, and the empire convinced itself that it had finally cracked the code to endless growth. The printing presses kept running, feeding the illusion that money could buy more time, more happiness, more everything. People stopped asking how or why. As long as their lives felt better, as long as the numbers on their paychecks grew, no one wanted to question the magic. The merchants called it progress. The rulers called it genius. And the crowd, grateful and distracted, believed them. But beneath the glittering surface, something fragile was forming. Prices began to rise, so slowly at first that it seemed harmless. The loaf of bread cost a little more, the rent crept higher, the savings bought a little less, yet everyone brushed it off, a small price to pay for prosperity. What they didn't see was the silent erosion beneath their feet. Every note printed without value was a theft from the future. Every illusion of wealth, a crack in the foundation. Like watering down fine wine, the taste remained sweet until it didn't. By the time anyone noticed, the truth was already too large to hide. The empire wasn't creating wealth anymore, it was recycling belief. The prosperity they praised wasn't growth, it was expansion built on air. But the lie was comfortable, and comfort has always been the most dangerous illusion of all. The empire smiled at its reflection, not realizing it was staring into a mirage. It started as a whisper, a few coins losing their shine, a few prices inching upward. No one panicked. The leaders called it temporary. The people shrugged and carried on, but the whisper grew louder. Suddenly, what once bought a week of food could barely buy a loaf of bread. Markets spun out of rhythm, wages chased prices, but prices always ran faster. The empire's miracle machine had turned against itself. The rich adapted quickly. They owned land, gold, and influence, things that held real weight. The poor, however, were trapped in the paper world. Their savings dissolved like sand in water. Every coin they earned was worth less by the time they spent it. Panic crept quietly through the streets. The faith that once held the empire together, the belief that a coin was a promise, began to die. People still traded, but without trust. Merchants raised prices daily, fearing tomorrow's worthlessness. Workers demanded more, only to find it meant nothing once their pay arrived. It was a cycle that fed on fear. The louder the government printed, the weaker its voice became. And through it all, the silence of realization began to settle in. The citizens who once celebrated progress now hoarded what little they had. The rich retreated behind gates, the poor behind bitterness. When trust collapses, everything else follows. Laws, loyalty, even love all depend on the quiet agreement that value means something. But when that meaning vanishes, so does the illusion of unity. The empire still stood. Its flag still waved. But beneath the surface, something vital had already snapped. And no amount of printed paper could ever glue it back together. The turning point had come not with war, but with disbelief. It happened slowly, then all at once. The markets that once danced with excitement now stood frozen. The coins that had felt solid in people's hands turned to dust in meaning. Overnight, the empire's wealth, its savings, its pensions, its promises dissolved like smoke. The people woke to find their fortunes worthless, their wages meaningless, their faith gone. The grand illusion had finally collapsed under the weight of its own creation. Shops closed their doors, unable to restock goods no one could afford. Farmers stopped bringing food to the cities. Why trade something real for paper that no longer held value? The printing presses thundered on, faster than ever, their rhythm desperate, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. But the more they printed, the faster the decay spread. The ink no longer inspired confidence. It reeked of fear. Panic became the new currency. People rushed to trade anything for something real: gold, grain, even safety. Prices changed by the hour. The rich, who once controlled the system, found themselves trapped by it. The poor, who had nothing left to lose, watched the powerful crumble beside them. The government promised stability, but their words rang hollow. Each new decree felt like another lie shouted into an empty room. What began as printing for growth had turned into printing for survival, and soon, printing just to pretend there was still order. And when the presses finally fell silent, the empire was unrecognizable. Its cities were quiet, its markets empty, its people weary. The miracle of endless money had turned into the curse of nothingness. For in the end, when faith dies, so does everything that once gave that faith meaning. The empire hadn't just lost its wealth, it had lost its soul. When the empire finally fell silent, the historians came. They walked through the ruins, notebooks in hand, searching for reasons. They would call it inevitable, as if collapse were written in the stars. But it wasn't fate that brought it down. It was pride. The kind that grows when people mistake momentum for mastery and power for wisdom. The empire didn't die because it had to. It died because no one wanted to face the truth soon enough to save it. The warnings were there. Economists whispered, advisors pleaded, even the streets murmured signs of strain, but the rulers looked away. To slow the printing would mean slowing the illusion, and illusions feed power. They told themselves they could manage it, control it, outsmart it. They believed their cleverness could bend the laws of value and consequence. That belief was their downfall. When you live in a system that demands endless growth, even truth becomes a threat. So they buried it beneath statistics, speeches, and false confidence. They built their empire higher, even as its foundation turned to dust. Denial became policy. Discipline became betrayal. And when it all came undone, the same leaders stood in disbelief, wondering how it could have happened. They spoke of unforeseen forces, of chance and bad luck, never of arrogance. But the truth was simple. They built an engine that could not stop running, even when the road ended. In the end, all that remained were lessons buried in dust, lessons written in the ruins of greed and pride. The empire had taught the world what happens when power refuses to listen to wisdom. Yet history shows that the dust of one empire is merely the foundation for the next. Centuries have passed, yet somehow we stand in the same place. Only now, the ink has turned to pixels, and the printing press hums inside machines. We call it progress. We tell ourselves we're smarter, more advanced, too modern to repeat the mistakes of the past, but the pattern is familiar, almost identical. We still create wealth from nothing, still borrow from futures we'll never see, still convince ourselves that numbers on screens are the same as value. The illusion didn't vanish, it evolved. This time, it feels cleaner. There's no paper to hold, no gold to weigh, just digits flashing across devices, promises hidden in code. We scroll past debt like it's data, swipe through spending like it's air. As long as the graphs rise, we believe everything is fine. The same pride that once filled palaces now lives inside our algorithms. But beneath the glow of our digital empires, the old cracks are forming again. Prices rise, wages stall, and faith in fairness fades. The rich build new fortresses, not of marble, but of information and influence. The poor trade hours for nothing that lasts. Inflation, inequality, and exhaustion creep in, quiet but relentless. We are repeating the story just with faster tools. The printing has become invisible, hidden behind terms like stimulus, liquidity, and growth. Yet the result is the same. The more we create from nothing, the more nothingness grows inside what we create. Every civilization believes it can cheat consequence. Every generation believes it's the exception. But the lesson remains unchanged. No empire, digital or divine, can outprint the truth. The mirrors of history don't lie. They only wait for us to recognize our own reflection staring back. In the end, no empire falls because of paper or coins. It falls because it forgets what those things stand for. Money was never just metal or ink or code. It was a story we all agreed to believe in. A symbol of trust between people, between effort and reward. When that trust fades, the numbers keep rising, but the meaning disappears. That's how civilizations collapse, not from poverty, but from disbelief. The warning signs are never loud at first. They begin as small distortions, greed replacing gratitude, convenience replacing craft, comfort replacing courage. We start trading what's real for what's easy. We call it progress. We call it success. But each trade chips away at something invisible, the soul of value itself. And by the time we notice, the system is too tangled to unwind, too proud to change. The truth is simple. Wealth is not how much we print, but how much we trust. An empire can survive loss, even failure, but it cannot survive the death of meaning. When people stop believing their labor matters, when promises become noise, the entire structure begins to hollow from within. We stand at that edge. Again, different tools, same temptation. To print, to spend, to postpone the reckoning. But every illusion ends the same way, with reality reclaiming what was borrowed. History doesn't repeat to punish us. It repeats to remind us. The fall is not inevitable, only the forgetting is. And if we continue to chase comfort over truth, numbers over meaning, then one day we'll look into the mirror of history and realize what we've become. Not victims of fate, but architects of our own undoing.